This is Anthony Kilner from Supernal Magazine Australia, and we have a very special guest, yet another special guest, talking about constitutional law and other bits and pieces in Andrea Tokaji. I hope I got that correct, Andrea.
Yep, absolutely fine.
Welcome to Supernal, and thank you for your time, because I know you're very busy. To our first-time sort of viewers who haven't seen you before, can you explain a bit about who you are and your qualifications?
Who I am, that's a very philosophical question, I suppose, but let's start with refugee kid. I came to Australia as a refugee, and therefore I loved growing up in a free democracy and appreciate it for what it was, contributing member of society through social services sector for the first 10 years of my life, but then got into law, advocacy, human rights work, and more recently legal academia.
I sort of looked at some of the stuff that you've been involved with as an anti-slavery advocate and a whole lot of other things, and I'm just thinking, wow, there's a whole nother story there. So we'll probably be knocking on your door at some point in the future and saying, hey, do you want to talk to us about this, and let's do a story on it, because it very much goes with that ethos of what we want to do. So current climate, there's a lot of stuff going on about constitutional law through COVID. There's a lot of stuff going on about state laws and how state laws can be changed to do nasty stuff that the government might have their hands tied where they can't do it, the federal government. You've been in politics, you know how things work. Give us a bit of an idea on the constitutional side. How does it work? And let's run it from there.
Yeah, so let's begin, and this will be a bit of a law lecture really, but let's begin by stating the obvious. We live in a constitutional democracy, which means that our constitution is our key document that tells us how our country governs, but also who can be in charge and when and how. It also gives jurisdiction to federal and state matters. Democracy obviously alludes to the fact that we are hopefully represented by people we elect. So those representatives should be elected in a very transparent way by their constituents. So given that, we also appreciate that we live within the principles of the rule of law. No one should be above the law. Principles of due process and access to justice. So all these things are kind of foundational underlying understandings we have. So Constitution, Section 51 lays out what state matters are versus federal matters. So, for example, portfolios such as health, education, and the like have a very dual jurisdiction in that it's federally funded, but it's up to the states and premiers and the health, for example, health minister to decide on how that money is allocated. So whenever you have a question of what jurisdiction it's in, good clue is follow the money trail. Who's getting paid by whom? And where is that money going? So if you follow the money trail, you'll kind of figure out jurisdictional responsibilities or powers, if you will. So the Constitution gives powers to the federal government to manage certain matters such as, migration matters, taxation, trade, all the rest of it. And then, of course, there are specific state matters. Now, whenever legislation is in conflict with one another. So if a premier, basically comes up with a new law in the best interest, they think, of their state, but it's in conflict with federal law has to come first. It takes precedent, it trumps it. So, for example, under COVID restrictions at the moment, we've got Section 92 of the Constitution that talks about that no one should interfere with the free trade and commerce between the states, because we are a sovereign state as a nation, and there should be free trade and commerce between the different states within our country, because we're one country, right? But as we're finding, under the restrictions, the lockdowns, that trade and commerce is being restricted. Well, how can they do that? This is within the Constitution, the highest document in our land. Well, it comes down to this little thing called emergency powers. So federally, we have the Biosecurity Act, and Section 60 and 61 of the Biosecurity Act lays out that no one can force you to wear a mask or isolate or go into lockdown unless the court orders you to do so based on medical evidence that you are infectious, you're carrying an infectious disease. So here we have step number one. You need a medical evidence to state that you have carrying an infectious disease. Step number two, the court orders you to self-isolate or wear a mask. And step number three, this is restricted to that proper purpose for a certain amount of time. So when laws are instituted, they should be proportionate and they should be transparent. They should, state why they're there, what their purpose is. They should be accessible to the common person to be able to read. Now, the issue we have is the emergency powers that premiers are using are based on state-based laws. So if you look at the Emergency Act within each state or territory, it's state-based law. This is where the premiers are getting their powers from. Now, in each jurisdiction, it states that for these emergency powers to be extended, it has to be reviewed within every 14 days. So every 2 weeks, it has to be reviewed and an extension submitted based on the evidence that they're required. There is a high level of requirement for this extension. So again, we're required to give evidence, right? The Premier, and in this case, the Chief Health Medical Officer, is required to give evidence to why this emergency power should continue. Now, under these emergency powers, as we can see, the Premiers and Chief Health Medical Officer have made decisions without legal due process in Parliament, without constitutional transparency. So, for example, constituents don't have a say in what decisions they make and for how long these will be. It's just the Premier and the Chief Health Medical Officer, often alongside the Health Minister and Emergency Services Minister. They will just sign off on these emergency powers. They will decide on these matters without our input, without parliamentary transparency, without this due process that's been in place since Federation 1901. So that's of concern.
It's the way you say it, it's just like, wow, it's just broken it all down from volumes of paperwork. But there just seems to be a lack of transparency from all government levels. Certainly here in Melbourne, all the way up to the Prime Minister, there seems to be a lack of transparency.
Yes, there is. And I would expand that to say internationally, there's been a lack of transparency. In March 2020, when we first went into lockdown, I did my research. I delved deep into this because I thought something sus is going on. And I wrote a paper in April 2020, backing it up with evidence at that point, saying and asking the question, where has this virus come from? Was it man-made? And now the evidence has come out that that is likely to be so. So look, there are questions around where this virus has come from, for what purpose it was created. Is it biochemical warfare? And therefore, the nature of the virus and the nature of its release is not natural. It doesn't have a natural death. And if it has adverse reasons for being created, then there's something sinister and deeper going on politically. I don't think any government has been fully transparent with their constituents, even with their own governments, in relation to what's been going on, because A, they haven't had all the information, and B, we haven't looked at it strategically in relation to what the ideology of communism is capable of. So again, my family escaped communism, and we understand firsthand that this ideology is relentless in seeking to overtake every other nation for the purpose of control. And so if that's the case, there are bigger questions at play here, and there are bigger concerns. But in the meantime, the common person's freedoms and rights are being restricted and restrained. And of course, once upon a time, we had privacy rights, and it's protected by the Privacy Act. So for example, these COVID apps are in direct violation of our privacy under the Privacy Act. So Section 94H and of the Privacy Act deals with there cannot be a mandatory use of force of any app that captures your information. And since that's been going on, we now know that the Australian Federal Police, for example, have accessed these COVID apps to download information for their purposes. So if they can do it, why can't, for example, one of our non-allied, neighbouring countries, not only access it, but hack this information and use it for their purposes? So there are real questions around transparency, control, the measures that are undertaking at the moment to, give alleged emergency powers to this alleged, pandemic, but then also what restrictions in relation to our rights and freedoms have occurred, and to what end? How long is this going to go on for? And because whenever our freedoms and rights are restricted, they should be A, for a proper purpose, B, proportionate, and C, for a specific time. And that's concerning.
Yeah, and I agree with you on that. It's especially here in Melbourne, we have been under the hardest hit, apparently, certainly with our restrictions and lockdowns and all of that. And my biggest concern, and certainly why we're putting this issue together of Supernal the way we are, is worried about people's mental health. When we know businesses are going under, we know that domestic violence is up, and all these other things as well. So it's all there. And of course, over in WA, you've had people being arrested based on knowledge of what they've been able to see on these COVID apps. So it does make it really interesting, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Yes. So I think within all of this, we need to take a step back and take a stock of where we're at. First of all, Parliament is here to serve the people. So we need to make sure that that continues. So make sure you're accessing not only your local member, but also the Minister for Emergency Services, Minister for Health, the Attorney General, and your Premier to ask these questions. Who's signing off on these emergency directives, and based on what evidence? Secondly, demand not only transparency, but evidence. Both law and parliamentary decision making is based on evidentiary reasons and reasoned legal arguments. So we cannot forget those due process mechanisms that are there to protect us, right, and our country. I would also add that within this time, and look, we've all been through it, separation from family, loss of employment, mental health issues, anxiety, depression, all the rest of it. Gather together with your local community, get together and support one another in talking about these issues together, discussing some, local community solutions, how you can support each other. And you know what? Introduce these bartering systems that allow you to thrive in the midst of all this chaos. For example, if you provide a service and you can swap it for another service you require within small business communities in your community, it's a positive way of supporting each other despite, you know, the economic uncertainty.
What a great idea. What a great idea, you know, getting people just to connect and be back to being what community is all about.
Yeah.
You know, where it started. Okay, well, that's given our watchers and our readers, because they'll be able to read a little bit about this in the magazine, a bit of a sort of a heads up. And it's good to just get a little bit of clarity without all the rhetoric, without all the toing and froing that our politicians tend to put at us and try and just sweep it under the carpet.
I would also suggest that communities get together not only to think and discuss these issues to support one another, but write lobbying letters. So it is our right still to write letters and meet with our members of parliament. And there's a bit of structure you can put around that. Firstly, make sure it's factual. Put lots of hyperlinks in there, statistics that you find. Secondly, make sure it's personal. Put your own story in there. Add, you know, what you've been through, family members or people you know have been through during this time. Thirdly, have solutions in there. There is no point lobbying or advocating or meeting up with your member of parliament if you don't have a proper solution in place. It doesn't have to be, you know, solving the world's problems. It can be the smallest of things. But make sure you have something that works towards a solution. And again, these can be templates that you use, a structure. I can share something with you if you like, and then, you know, add your own personal information within that and be consistent. Send it to all the ministers and the Premier, but target the ones that you know this is their jurisdiction, their portfolio, because they have a duty to respond. So often they will not receive the lobbying letters themselves. Their staffers will, and their staffers will often decide whether they will pass the letter on or not. So a few ways around that. Firstly, do a follow-up phone call. Hey, just sent you my lobbying letter, looking to meet up next week to discuss it. Put an appointment in their diary, make sure you meet up with them. Secondly, another way around it is to get a letter signed by many organisations, businesses, constituents. So it's well represented. When you go for that meeting, you can say, I'm representing all of your constituents, or, you know, 100 business people in this area. So thirdly, another way around, you know, not receiving that response or reply is to really be public about it. You can get journalists involved. You can, you know, go to the media about a story that you have and put that pressure on politicians. And of course, state that this is your job on the line, the votes next election, and your reputation. But of course, it always comes back to they're functioning under these emergency powers. How are these emergency powers being justified currently?
Mm-hmm. Great points. Well, what we will do, Andrea, is pop some information into the story that we're putting in the magazine, and we can always create a link back to paperwork to help people. So that's
sure.
Well, look, just a quick interview from us to get a bit of an understanding. So thank you very much again for your time. And we will have contact links available when we put this video up so that people can get in touch with you via your website. And again, I just thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for having me, and all the best there in Victoria.
Thank you.